The sky over dead America was a silent witness to the collapse of everything once known. Cities that had once buzzed with life now stood still, consumed by decay. Roads cracked under the weight of time, and nature had begun to reclaim the land humans abandoned in fear. But beneath the silence, something darker still stirred, the shadows of the undead, ever watchful, ever hungry for the last remnants of hope. Sergeant Mason Cole had survived what many had not. A veteran of the last major human stand, the fall of Chicago, he had seen the transformation of friends into enemies, of bustling cities into echoing tombs. After 2 years of wandering from one survivor outpost to another, he had grown used to the quiet. But he never got used to the emptiness. Or the guilt. His bunker, hidden beneath a collapsed military checkpoint in Missouri, had kept him safe. But today, he wasn't staying in. He had received something he hadn't expected, a signal. It was weak, barely more than static, but it was there. A voice. A human one. This is Command Echo, any allied response, respond, initiative, reclaim, is live, repeat. He rewound the recording and played it again. It wasn't a loop. Someone was broadcasting live. More importantly, someone was trying to fight back. Mason stared at the speaker. Command Echo had been presumed lost 6 months ago. Hearing them now was like hearing a ghost. But ghosts didn't broadcast coordinated missions. If Echo was alive, then maybe others were too. He stood and opened his weapons locker, not for killing, but for surviving. His combat knife, a scoped rifle, a reinforced bat, and a custom drone he called Watcher. None of it had been used in weeks. Dust clung to everything, but Mason wiped it all clean with purpose. Before leaving, he looked once more at the wall of old photos. His unit. His brother. His parents. None of them had made it. He placed a hand on the photo of his team. For all of you. I'll finish this fight. The world outside was covered in a light mist. Buildings loomed like skeletons of a forgotten era. Every sound seemed amplified, the wind rustling a torn flag, the distant creak of rusted metal. But Mason moved with the caution of a man who had learned not to trust silence. In dead America, the undead didn't always groan. Some waited. He activated Watcher, the drone lifting into the air with a soft hum. From above, it scanned the streets, motionless cars, collapsed storefronts, and movement. Not human. Slow, unsteady, and twitching. 3 figures in tattered clothes dragging their feet near the remains of a police car. Undead. Small pack, non-aggressive, Mason muttered, checking their route. They weren't a threat unless provoked, but they blocked the bridge he needed to cross. He opted for stealth. Slipping into the remains of a pharmacy, he found a collapsed wall that led to the upper floor. From there, he could crawl across to an adjoining rooftop and bypass the bridge. It was risky, the floors were unstable, but it was better than a direct encounter. As he made his way across broken beams, a sudden crash echoed below. One of the walkers had stumbled into a trash bin. The noise stirred the others, their heads snapping up in eerie unison. Mason froze, then ducked behind a crumbling HVAC unit. He watched them gather, sniffing the air as if sensing something had changed. For a terrifying moment, one looked straight up at the rooftop. Then it turned away. Not this time. Mason continued, reaching the edge of the rooftop and spotting his next destination, a partially intact communication tower a few blocks ahead. If Echo was broadcasting, that's where the signal might have bounced from. But as he observed through his scope, something unexpected appeared, movement on the tower. Not walkers. Fast, coordinated. Someone was up there. He quickly adjusted Watcher's camera and zoomed in. 2 people. One was waving a signal flag, old-school military code. Mason's heart raced. They weren't just alive, they were trying to contact others like him. Suddenly, the signaler stopped waving and ducked. A shadow moved below them. Walkers? No, something else. A figure climbed up the tower's lower rungs with a chilling agility that no undead should possess. Its skin was pale, but its movements were too quick, too deliberate. Not a walker, Mason whispered, eyes narrowing. What are you? Whatever it was, it reached the platform in seconds. The two survivors fought back with what they had, flares, makeshift weapons, but the creature knocked one off the platform with ease. Mason watched in horror as the second survivor was grabbed and pulled down. Silence returned, but the shadows around the tower seemed to grow. Mason clenched his jaw. This wasn't just about zombies anymore. Whatever the undead had become, they were evolving. And the fight to reclaim America had just changed forever. Mason didn't sleep that night. The image of the strange creature scaling the tower haunted him. It moved with purpose, unlike any walker he had ever encountered. Walkers shambled. They stumbled. But this one, it hunted. At dawn, Mason made his move. The streets were quieter in the early morning. Most of the undead were less active when the sun was high. He advanced carefully through alleyways, staying low, always watching the shadows. Watcher hovered above, scanning ahead for any threats. The drone fed back images of the tower, still intact but clearly damaged from the earlier attack. When Mason reached the base of the tower, he paused behind a rusted SUV. The air was thick with the scent of decay and dust. No sign of the strange creature. No sign of the survivors either. Just bloodless drag marks on the concrete, broad streaks leading into a nearby building. He entered cautiously. Inside, the air was stale. The structure, once a community center, was now nothing more than a ruin. He followed the drag marks up a stairwell lit by the faint morning sun seeping through broken windows. On the second floor, he found signs of a struggle, scratched floors, a shattered flare, and torn pieces of cloth. But more importantly, he found something else, a working laptop, rigged to a small battery-powered satellite uplink. The screen blinked with a single message. Reclaim Initiative, Echo Outpost 7. Survivor Broadcast Protocol, Loop 14. Status, compromised. Mason sat down and examined the files. A video file was still open in the background. He clicked it. The image was shaky. A woman, early 30s, dressed in a makeshift uniform, stared into the camera. Her name tag read Lieutenant Harper. Her voice was calm, but the fear behind her eyes was unmistakable. If you're seeing this, you're not alone. We're trying to reconnect the remaining Echo outposts. If you're military, we need you. If you're a civilian, survive and wait for contact. But if you're seeing this, you're close. That means the others have found us. The feed glitched, then resumed. They're not like the infected. They think. They plan. We call them shadows. They appear human, until they're not. Avoid them. Do not try to engage unless fully armed. They're the reason the towers are going silent. Then the feed cut off entirely. Mason leaned back. Shadows. That's what he saw yesterday, something faster, smarter, and more dangerous than walkers. If the undead were evolving, this changed everything. He copied the files from the laptop onto his drive, then disabled the uplink. It was no longer safe to broadcast from here. Whatever attacked Lieutenant Harper and her team could still be nearby. As he descended the stairs, Watcher sent a silent ping to his wrist device, movement approaching the building. Mason crouched low and peered through a crack in the boarded-up window. 5 figures emerged from the street. From a distance, they looked human. But as they drew closer, he noticed something was wrong. Their posture was too stiff, their heads tilted in an unnatural angle. Their skin, too pale, almost translucent in the light. Shadows. Mason backed away from the window and moved silently toward the rear exit. He needed to escape without being seen. But as he pushed the door open, a metallic clang echoed down the alley. A pipe had fallen. He froze. The shadows turned in unison. And then, unlike walkers who stumbled toward noise, they sprinted. Mason ran. He darted through the alley, weaving between debris, his breath sharp and focused. The shadows followed, leaping over wreckage with terrifying grace. Watcher soared overhead, mapping the pursuit. Mason turned sharply and slipped into a collapsed garage, pulling down the rusted door behind him. Silence. He crouched in the dark, every breath controlled, listening. Footsteps outside. One of them paused. Mason could hear slow, deliberate breathing. Then, nothing. 5 long minutes passed before he peeked outside. The street was empty again. He was lucky. This time. But now he had proof, these weren't just variants. These were something new. Something organized. As he moved toward his next destination, an old military depot known as Site Kilo, Mason's thoughts burned with questions. Were the shadows leading the undead? Were they once human? And if they were intelligent, what did they want? He knew one thing for sure, this war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming a nation from something much darker than death. The journey to Site Kilo took Mason through the heart of forgotten America. Overgrown highways, silent towns with boarded windows, and fields dotted with rusted vehicles were constant reminders of the world that once was. The undead were scattered and thin this far out, but Mason knew better than to let his guard down. In dead America, the most dangerous enemy wasn't always the one you could see. Watcher's scans kept him ahead of any trouble. As the drone floated above, Mason remained in the shadows, sticking to tree lines and collapsing infrastructure. Site Kilo was hidden deep within a forest near the edge of a former military zone in Arkansas, a place not even scavengers dared to explore anymore. It had been off the grid even before the outbreak. The sun was just starting to set when the tree line broke, revealing the perimeter fence of Site Kilo. The gate was still standing, but the motion sensor turrets that once defended the entrance were nothing more than burnt-out husks. No signs of gunfire. No signs of forced entry. Just silence. Mason climbed over a section where the fence had collapsed and entered cautiously, his rifle raised. The base was larger than he remembered from the satellite images, a collection of hangars, barracks, and reinforced bunkers. But there were no guards. No lights. No signs of life. Or death. Inside the command building, he found dust-covered equipment, dried-out food supplies, and a generator that had run out of fuel long ago. Mason checked the logs on a still-functioning terminal. The last entry was dated 7 months ago. Captain Reyes has gone silent. Half the squad is missing. We're locking down until evac. No more patrols. Something is watching us from the tree line. This isn't just about the undead anymore. They're studying us. No further logs. Mason stared at the screen. Studying us? He replayed the words in his head. The soldiers hadn't been overrun, they had been observed. Hunted. Taken. He made his way through the remaining structures. In one of the supply buildings, he found a message scratched into a wall near the exit hatch. We were the bait. Whatever had happened here wasn't a normal attack. These soldiers had been left behind for a reason, perhaps sacrificed for information. Or worse, used as part of a larger plan. Inside the armory bunker, he discovered something that made his chest tighten, a sealed crate marked, Classified Cargo, Project Revenant. Mason pried it open. Inside were blueprints, biological containment kits, and a worn journal marked, Property of Lieutenant D. Keller, Do Not Open. He flipped through it cautiously. We thought we could control the virus. Modify it. Use it against itself. But we were wrong. Some of them, they retained memories. Intelligence. Their minds didn't fully die. We made them smarter. Faster. We called them shadows. I fear we've created something worse than death. The journal ended abruptly with a torn page. Mason closed the journal slowly. The shadows weren't natural evolutions, they were man-made. Weaponized. The fall of America wasn't just a biological disaster, it was an experiment gone wrong. Someone had tried to turn the undead into tools of war, and now those tools had taken control. Watcher beeped. Movement detected. Mason rushed outside and climbed to the top of the comms tower overlooking the base. Through the trees on the northern perimeter, he saw them, figures in dark clothes, moving in near-perfect formation, silently. 5, no, 6 of them. Their eyes scanned the tree line. Not walkers. Not survivors. Shadows. They moved like a unit, sweeping the area as if looking for something. Mason ducked. He tapped into Watcher's audio feed, but there were no vocal commands, no radio chatter, just the wind and their quiet footsteps. They were communicating non-verbally. Military training, perhaps? Leftovers from their human lives? Then one of them stopped and looked up, directly at Watcher. Mason's breath caught. The shadow raised one hand. The rest stopped immediately. It pointed. Mason didn't wait. He shut down Watcher and dropped back inside the tower. Within seconds, the drone feed was lost, disabled remotely, or destroyed. He grabbed the journal, the blueprints, and his gear and slipped through the emergency tunnel out of the base. Whatever Site Kilo had been hiding was no longer safe in one place. And now, they knew he had it. As he emerged from the forest under the cover of night, he looked back once more at the crumbling facility. The truth was clear. The shadows weren't just a mutation. They were part of a plan. And now that plan was evolving. The night was thick with fog and silence, broken only by the distant growl of the wind through the trees. Mason moved swiftly, covering his tracks as he left Site Kilo behind. The stolen journal from Lieutenant Keller and the blueprints labeled Project Revenant burned a hole in his backpack, not literally, but with the weight of secrets. He needed answers. Real ones. And that meant finding someone who had stayed off the radar and hadn't given up the fight. Luckily, he had a lead. Back in Site Kilo's comms tower, Mason had found a set of frequencies recorded in a logbook. They were old and scrambled, but one was still faintly active. A repeating pulse. It was military-grade encryption, but the signal didn't come from any known base. It came from the south, near what used to be a mining town called Clearpoint. According to the logs, survivors had once set up a relay station in the tunnels beneath it. If any remnants of organized resistance still existed, they'd be there. 2 days later, Mason stood at the edge of Clearpoint. It looked deserted, more than most towns. Not even the undead wandered the streets. Buildings were boarded up tight, cars left abandoned mid-turn, and power lines hung loose like metal vines. A faint echo lingered in the air, like the town itself remembered being alive. Mason moved through the streets carefully, heading toward the old coal elevator in the southern sector. Watcher, rebuilt with salvaged parts from Site Kilo, hovered low and quiet, scanning for movement. Nothing yet. But Mason's instincts were screaming. The elevator door was rusted but open. A faded sign read, "Authorized personnel only, Tunnel B13 closed indefinitely." He climbed down into the shaft, rifle slung but ready. The tunnel below was surprisingly intact. Cables and motion detectors lined the walls, recent. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. As Mason advanced, he found an old access door tucked into the stone wall. He knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more, just as the signal pattern had instructed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, click. The door cracked open, and a rifle barrel met his face. "State your name," a voice ordered from the shadows. "Mason Briggs. Former 5th Battalion. Echo Unit." "I'm not infected." The barrel didn't lower. "Prove it." Mason slowly lifted his sleeve and pressed a scanner to his arm. It glowed green. "Clean." The voice finally spoke again, less harsh this time. "Welcome to the burrow." Inside was a sight Mason hadn't seen in a long time: people. Real people. A network of survivors, maybe 20 in total, manning radios, repairing equipment, tending to wounded. The tunnel had been transformed into a command center. A tall woman stepped forward. "I'm Commander Asha Trent. I run what's left of Resistance Node 12. How'd you find us?" Mason handed her the journal and blueprints. "Site Kilo. I found these. You're going to want to see what's inside." She scanned them quickly. Her face changed. "You weren't supposed to find this," she muttered. "What does it mean?" Mason asked. Trent looked at him. Project Revenant wasn't just about weaponizing the virus. It was about controlling it. Those shadows out there, they were experiments. Human subjects. Soldiers, prisoners, anyone expendable. When the program failed, they buried it. Literally. Site Kilo was a tomb. You were never meant to know about it. But now they're evolving, Mason said. They shut down my drone. They moved like a unit. Trent nodded grimly. They're not evolving, Briggs. They're remembering. Mason stepped back. You're saying, they still have their minds? Pieces of them, at least. And now they're organizing. Some believe a leader has emerged. One of the original test subjects, referred to only as Subject 0. If that's true, then we're not just fighting infected anymore. We're fighting strategy. The lights flickered. A young scout ran in, breathless. Commander, we've got movement, northern shaft. 4 figures. Moving fast. Trent grabbed her weapon. Looks like they followed you. Mason's heart sank. Then we fight. Within moments, the burrow transformed. Sandbag barricades, fallback positions, emergency exits, these people had trained for this. Mason took a position at the front. The shadows had found them, but this time, he wasn't alone. They waited in tense silence, every sound amplified by the tunnel walls. Then, shuffling footsteps. A shadow moved. Another. The first figure appeared, its eyes reflecting the faint tunnel lights. Not a walker. Not mindless. A shadow. Then it smiled. Mason felt a chill crawl up his spine. This war had changed. The air inside the burrow was thick with anticipation. Every soldier, civilian, and scout inside the underground resistance hub had their weapon ready, aimed at the northern tunnel entrance. The lights flickered again, casting shadows across the walls, shadows that no longer felt safe. Mason's finger hovered near the trigger of his rifle. He couldn't stop replaying what he saw on the surface, how one of the shadows looked directly at his drone and pointed. How it moved with intelligence, not instinct. And now they were here, in the tunnels, hunting. Footsteps echoed. Slow. Purposeful. Then the first shadow appeared. He stepped into view as if he owned the tunnel, wearing tattered remains of military gear. His head tilted slightly, eyes glowing faintly under the emergency lights. Behind him, 3 more moved into position. No snarling. No growling. Just silence. Calculated silence. Mason whispered to Commander Trent, "They're probing. Watching our reaction." She nodded. "We don't shoot first." One of the shadows stepped forward. In a slow, deliberate movement, it raised one hand, palm up. Then it spoke. "Return the files." The voice was dry and broken, as if it hadn't spoken in years, but the words were clear. Human. Deliberate. Gasps echoed behind Mason. A child whimpered. One of the resistance fighters cursed under their breath. "They can talk," Mason muttered. The lead shadow pointed at Mason's backpack. "You do not understand what you carry." Mason took a step forward. "I understand enough. You were created. You were experimented on. But you're not in control." The shadow tilted its head again. "Neither are you." Without warning, all four shadows rushed forward. "Open fire!" Trent shouted. The tunnel roared with the sound of gunfire. Mason dove for cover behind a steel crate as bullets struck the walls around him. The shadows moved fast, far faster than normal undead. They weaved, rolled, and returned fire. One had a makeshift weapon, a sharpened pipe. Another hurled a smoke grenade. Tactical. Within seconds, the tunnel was filled with chaos and dust. Mason pressed his back against the wall and watched as one of the resistance fighters was dragged into the smoke, screaming. Shadows didn't just attack. They took people. "Fall back," Trent ordered. "Seal the lower tunnel." Mason helped a wounded scout limp back as the resistance fell into retreat mode. They slammed the first emergency door shut, welding it behind them. But the shadows kept coming, relentless and silent. The team fell back deeper into the burrow, into the reinforced control chamber, an old mining command center turned panic room. A thick steel door closed behind them, locking out whatever was coming. For now. Trent wiped blood from her forehead and threw Mason a look. "You brought this here." Mason didn't flinch. "They were coming anyway. I just gave them a reason to act faster." She paced the room, gripping her sidearm. "We can't outgun them in a direct fight. They know this place. They've studied our movements. And if that lead one is who I think it is." Mason asked, "Who?" Trent paused. "Captain Jax Monroe. He went missing during the earliest Revenant experiments. He was Subject 1. Smart, capable, and the first to survive full infection." Mason swallowed hard. "He's leading them. He remembers tactics, commands, maybe even emotions, but twisted by the virus. He's not like the others. And if he's down here, he's not here to destroy us." "Then what?" "He's here to recruit." That hit harder than any bullet. The shadows weren't just mindless killers, they were building something. A faction. A purpose. The room's lights flickered again. Then darkness. A low hum began. Mason spun toward the power controls. EMP pulse. "They're disabling everything. Backup batteries, now." Trent ordered. A pair of resistance engineers scrambled to reroute power. Mason gripped his rifle and turned toward the door. In the distance, a faint tapping began, like fingers on steel. Tap. 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 Then silence. Then a voice, low and clear, echoed through the ventilation system. "Join us, or fall with the dead." Everyone froze. Mason stepped forward, fire burning in his eyes. "If Monroe wants a war, we'll give him one. But not here. Not trapped." Trent nodded slowly. "There's a maintenance tunnel. Leads to the surface through an old vent shaft." "It's a death trap," one of the scouts said. "Better than waiting here," Mason replied. "We need to get above ground. Regroup. And then strike back. On our terms." They loaded weapons, passed around the remaining supplies, and said their quiet goodbyes to the place they once called safe. Then, one by one, they disappeared into the darkness of the escape tunnel. Mason was the last to leave, casting one final look at the door. He wasn't running. He was regrouping. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming dead America. The cold surface air stung Mason's face as he emerged from the rusted ventilation shaft. Dirt clung to his uniform, his rifle scraped and battered, but his spirit was more focused than ever. Behind him, Commander Trent and the last of the resistance fighters climbed out, coughing from the dust but alive. Above them, the world looked the same, dead, abandoned, still crawling with infected wanderers. But something had changed, now they knew the truth. The shadows weren't just smart. They were organized, and they had a leader who could think like a soldier. Mason whispered, "We strike them the way they struck us, silent, fast, and surgical." They moved to an abandoned ranger station just outside the tree line. It was quiet, secure, and high enough to get a drone in the air. Mason unfolded the compact recon drone and launched it with shaking hands. Within moments, the drone zipped above the ruined city, scanning for heat signatures and unusual movements. "There," Mason said, pointing at the screen. The drone showed a gathering just beyond the ruins of a shopping mall. Dozens of infected were moving in unnatural formations, forming rings. In the center, a fire burned. Not a wild one, controlled, strategic. "They're building something," Trent murmured. "Maybe a stronghold. Or a command post." Mason zoomed in further and saw something even more disturbing, one of the resistance fighters they lost in the burrow. Alive. Chained. Surrounded by shadows. They weren't just killing anymore. They were converting. "We need to hit them tonight," Mason said. "In and out. Target their comms relay, disrupt their network, and leave a message, we're not just prey." Trent nodded. "It'll be suicide if they detect us early. But if we hit fast and scatter, they'll start to question their control." That night, under a moonless sky, the team approached the site. Mason, Trent, and 3 hand-picked scouts moved through alleyways, ducked under collapsed buildings, and slid into position on the second floor of a crumbling bookstore. Below, the shadows gathered around the fire. There were more than expected, at least 40. In the center stood Monroe, unmistakable now with the half-torn insignia still visible on his chest. He was speaking. Directing. Planning. "Now," Mason whispered. The team sprang into action. One scout tossed an EMP grenade toward a surveillance node near the fire. Sparks erupted. Lights flickered. Confusion spread. Simultaneously, Mason and Trent leapt down and rushed toward the relay device at the edge of the gathering. It was an old military-grade antenna rig, now fused with stolen tech, proof the shadows were expanding their knowledge. With precise coordination, Mason attached a small charge. "Timer set for 45 seconds, he called out. They turned to leave, and Monroe was there, blocking their path. He didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He spoke. "You could have been one of us, Mason. Still can." Mason leveled his rifle. "Not interested in being dead on my feet. Then you'll be hunted forever." "Good. Keeps me sharp." He pulled the trigger, but Monroe vanished in a blur, slipping into the shadows like smoke. The blast behind them lit up the night sky. The relay erupted, scattering debris and fire. Chaos broke out. The shadows screamed, not mindlessly, but in confusion and frustration. As they retreated through side alleys, Mason paused only once, to release the captured resistance fighter. The man was barely conscious, but alive. Back at the ranger station, adrenaline still pumping, the team celebrated quietly. "One target down," Trent said, wiping soot from her cheek. "But they'll come back harder." "They'll make mistakes," Mason replied. "They think they're evolving. But they're still fighting like machines." Predictable. If we stay unpredictable, we win. Trent glanced out the broken window. What's the next step? Mason stared at the horizon, where a faint glow hinted at sunrise. We hit their memory. They've got a database. Names, patterns, targets. We erase it. We make them blind. And how do you know that? He pulled a folded page from his pocket, an intel sheet recovered from the burrow. It had Monroe's signature at the bottom and a list of shadow movements. I don't just know where they're going, he said. I know where they've been. As dawn broke, Mason and his team knew they had shifted the tide, even just a little. They had struck from the surface, delivered a blow in the shadow's own language. This was no longer just survival. It was warfare. And the resistance had just fired its first real shot. Mason knelt beside the campfire, holding the scorched intel sheet beneath the flickering flame. The symbols were cryptic, a hybrid of military codes and something new, something artificial. The shadows weren't just mimicking military tactics. They had developed their own operating system, and now Mason was holding a piece of its core. Commander Trent leaned over his shoulder. You really think they're storing data somewhere? Mason nodded. The way Monroe talks, the way they track us, they're learning from every encounter. There's a central memory, a vault. If we hit it, they lose their tactical edge. And if we don't? They adapt faster than we can fight. It was the next morning, and the team had relocated to an abandoned observatory on a nearby mountain. From there, they could see the city's southern edge, where a building remained strangely untouched by destruction, a concrete dome marked with an old Weather Service logo. But something about it pulsed with unnatural energy. We believe that's the memory vault, Mason said, pointing through binoculars. It used to be a communications hub. Now, it's humming like a machine that never sleeps. Trent narrowed her eyes. So we're going into a fortress where the enemy stores every detail about us? Yes, Mason said calmly. But if we get in and destroy it, we wipe out their ability to strategize. They'll revert to instinct. That's a war we can win. That night, under the cover of fog, the team descended the ridge. The dome loomed in the distance like a watchful eye. As they moved, Mason reviewed their plan. Team A infiltrates through the ventilation shaft on the west side. Team B creates a diversion on the east perimeter. We go in, upload the virus, and wipe the system. Trent, beside him, adjusted her gear. And if Monroe's there? Then I finish what I should have at the mall. The closer they got, the stranger the environment became. The air grew thick, the silence unnatural. Lights inside the dome pulsed with eerie rhythm, as if the building itself had a heartbeat. They reached the vent and crawled inside, weapons drawn. Mason's breathing slowed. Every sound, every movement, was amplified in the claustrophobic metal shaft. When they emerged inside, they found themselves in a chamber that looked nothing like a military facility. Screens lined the walls, displaying live feeds from across the country. Drones flew silently overhead, recording survivor movements. Voice clips echoed, snippets of radio transmissions, cries for help, strategic orders. This is how they know everything, whispered Trent. A central terminal stood in the middle of the room, cold, humming, alive. Mason approached it with the encrypted drive he'd salvaged weeks ago. As he inserted the drive, a warning flashed across the screen in red. Authorized access only. Identity, Shadow General Monroe confirmed. Wait, Mason paused. This isn't just data storage. This is Monroe. Suddenly, the lights dimmed, and the voice they feared echoed through the chamber. Curious, isn't it? Monroe's voice purred from the walls. You're standing inside my mind. A door slammed shut behind them. Gas hissed through vents. A countdown started on the main console, 5 minutes. Trent's eyes widened. It's a trap. No, Mason said. It's an opportunity. He pulled out a secondary device, a backdoor worm he'd been developing since he first encountered Monroe in the burrow. You want your mind, Monroe? Let's feed it something it can't control. Mason uploaded the virus. The screen flickered, the countdown paused. Then the entire room shook violently. Sparks exploded from the ceiling. Data streams melted into static. Get out! Mason shouted. They ran, the virus tearing through the system behind them like wildfire. As they reached the surface, the dome erupted in a shockwave of digital chaos and fire. Mason and Trent dove behind cover as the vault of memory crumbled into ruin. The others regrouped at the mountain observatory hours later. No one spoke for a while. Then Trent finally asked, "Is it over?" Mason shook his head. Not even close. But now, they're blind. And we've got momentum. What about Monroe? Mason stared into the distance. He's more than a man now. He's fragmented. Pieces of him are out there, but the core is gone. We hit him where it hurt. Trent gave a small smile. Feels good to hit back. As the sun rose over the ruined country, Mason looked out at the ghostly landscape below. Dead America was changing. And the living had just turned the tide. Smoke curled from the remains of the vault of memory, painting the sky in streaks of ash and defiance. Mason stood at the edge of the ridge, scanning the horizon as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. The shadows had lost their mind, their memory. Now, they were thrashing, disoriented, but not defeated. Not yet. Commander Trent stepped up beside him, bandaged and bruised. We've intercepted scattered movements. No more coordination. No more strategic clusters. They're just roaming now, but still dangerous. Mason didn't take his eyes off the valley below. That means they'll regroup somewhere familiar. Somewhere symbolic. You think they'll try to hold DC? I think they have to. It's the last place they'd expect us to strike, and the last place we can afford to let them keep. He turned to face his team, the resistance fighters that had survived everything, underground burrows, ambushes, memory vaults, and their own fears. He raised his voice just enough to cut through the silence. This isn't just a mission. This is it. We take the capital, we send a message, the living are done running. Mason's plan was bold, an all-or-nothing strike on the ruins of Washington, D.C., where the undead had claimed the heart of the old world. But now, with their intelligence shattered, they couldn't predict what was coming. In the following days, word spread. Survivors came out of hiding, farmers, ex-police, engineers, even former enemies, united under one mission, to reclaim the soul of a dead country. Convoys rolled through burned-out highways. Drones scouted ahead. Traps were set, tunnels collapsed, supply routes forged. Then the day came. At dawn, Mason stood on the steps of the crumbled Lincoln Memorial, now covered in vines and ash. Beside him, the resistance waited in formation, armor patched together from scrap, weapons refurbished from forgotten bunkers. From the ruins of Pennsylvania Avenue, the shadows emerged, thousands of them, no longer silent and strategic but still relentless, driven by fragments of instinct. Among them, a figure appeared. Half human, half machine. Burnt, limping, but undeniably him. Monroe. His eyes locked with Mason's. There was no speech this time. No offer. Only the cold understanding between two leaders, only one would survive the next hour. Then the shadows charged. The battle was chaos. Gunfire cracked through the air. Explosives turned abandoned monuments into firestorms. Shadows leapt from rooftops, but resistance fighters held their ground, using the city's ruins as cover. Drones dropped smokescreens while snipers picked off the fastest threats. Mason moved like a ghost, flanking through alleys, taking out infected that got too close to the med teams. He radioed in positions, called for air support from stolen enemy drones, and led the push straight to the Capitol steps. There, amidst the cracked pillars, Monroe waited. They fought without words, knife against claw, fist against synthetic strength. Mason's ribs cracked, Monroe's metal arm sparked. They circled like wolves in the ruins of civilization. "You've already lost," Monroe rasped, voice glitched. Mason narrowed his eyes. "Then why are you still fighting?" With a final surge of strength, Mason plunged a sharpened steel spike, salvaged from the old White House fence, through Monroe's chest. The hybrid creature staggered, twitched, and finally collapsed into the dust. Around them, the shadows paused. Then trembled. Then turned. Without their leader, without direction, they scattered, some collapsing, some fleeing into the distant forests. The battle was over. Silence fell over the Capitol. Survivors emerged from smoke and rubble, blinking in disbelief. The heart of dead America had been taken back. Later, Mason stood atop the Capitol dome, partially destroyed, but still towering. He broadcast a signal to every corner of the country. "This is Sergeant Mason Cole. Washington is ours. The shadows are broken. If you can hear this, you are not alone. This land still belongs to the living. Come home." The transmission echoed across broken radios and old TVs in bunkers, shelters, and hidden outposts. Tears fell. Cheers erupted. Dead America had taken a breath of life again. As night fell, Mason watched the stars from the rooftop, finally visible through a clear sky. Trent joined him. "You think this is the end?" "No," Mason said quietly. "It's the beginning. The end."